Now on to the heart of our show, For Real, For Real. And it's fitting that we, after the tribute to Monica Roberts, have as our first segment a conversation about the election. That's exactly as she would have wanted it to be. We are, as I said, just 5 days away from the election, where not only will ballots be cast for president and vice president, but of course, thousands of offices across the United States. Here to talk to us about where the race stands tonight is Matt Katz, who is right now a political and campaign reporter for WNYC, among many other beats as well, including immigration and sadly hate groups. So we're so thrilled that you are here with us, Matt. Thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, it's such a pleasure, Mara. Thank you so much.
Thank you. So let's begin with the basic question, the title. Where do you think the race stands? What is the state of the race 5 days out?
Yeah, it's what the most amazing part of where we are right now is that 80 million Americans have already voted. So we're like almost like halfway through election day in a sense. And in Texas alone, the number of people who voted is almost equal to the total electorate back in 2016. So there's a strong interest and strong motivation out there for people to be out and voting. Now, where it stands in terms of who's winning, Joe Biden has a 9%, approximately a 9% lead nationally. The website 538 simulated the election 40,000 times as they do, and they to determine like who would win in all the different kinds of scenarios. And Biden wins 89 out of 100 times. Now, we've seen close races before that were supposed to go one way, they went the other way, and that's why everything totally comes down to the swing states. And if one or two swing states are close, they could really determine this thing and flip it back in Trump's direction. And then if not, we're potentially in for a protracted court fight that could end in the Supreme Court. And I think the bottom line is that people should not be like opening a beer and a bottle of wine on election night and expecting to like know what happened by the end of that night. We're not going to know. I can't imagine we know, even when we wake up in the morning. I think this is going to take days, weeks, maybe months to be certain who the next president of the United States is. And then there's all kinds of variables that could happen the longer this goes. I mean, this could end up in Congress if there's a dispute in a state. There's weird shenanigans involving electors that could happen. The people that like get sent to Washington to actually cast the ballot on behalf of the voters. And then, of course, it could end up in the Supreme Court, as it did 20 years ago. So tons of uncertainty, and I think everybody should buckle in. We're in for a bit.
Yeah. Now, I think that, part of what we want to do tonight as well is to allay people's fears. I think we've just dialed them all the way up, possibly. I mean, I think that a couple of things that are important to note is the fact that everyone, has memories of 2016. One, unlike 2016, the polling in this race has been extremely stable, almost for all year long. And also Joe Biden, has cracked 50%, which Hillary never did in her polling. And so for statisticians, those are significant things in this race. We'll come to some of the things that we should worry about later. I think one of the questions that I think is really important is what people should look for. So if Joe Biden is having a good night, what does that look like? When people are looking at the returns as they come in, what is a positive direction? Even if there's no resolution next Tuesday, what does a positive direction for Joe Biden look like on Tuesday? And what does a positive direction for Donald Trump look like as you're at home on the couch with bourbon and popcorn?
Right, as I will be. I think there are a couple of states that people are going to want to pay attention to. Pennsylvania is probably That's all the prognosticators are indicating that that's the most important. That if Biden has a comfortable lead in the day after the election, it's going to take them a couple of days to count the votes there. But if he has a early lead there, that would be a good sign for Joe Biden for sure. If he doesn't win Pennsylvania, there are other. If it doesn't look good for him in Pennsylvania, North Carolina, Arizona, Florida are backups. And then there's these two states that, a year ago, nobody would have thought would be in play. Georgia and then Texas. If Joe Biden is leading in Texas, it would essentially be game over. He's now in striking distance, according to polls, a couple points out. And that's an extraordinary thing, not just for Joe Biden in the next 4 years, but really for the future of this country. If Texas is blue, the whole dynamic and where things break down politically and the direction of the country in terms of the legislative and executive branch are going to change dramatically. So if there are Biden supporters out there who want some optimism, they should look at some of these Texas polls. They're pretty amazing. And then it's really the flip thing for Trump. He's got to win Texas and he's got to win Pennsylvania. What he's doing though, and what he really needs to do is to suppress the vote. That's his game. He's never had most of the country in his corner. He didn't win 50% of the vote in 2016. He never had 50% of the approval ratings in this country. So he needs to suppress the vote, and they've been pretty overt about that. He's got lawyers in all these states working to, contest ballot signatures, block access to drop boxes where people are dropping off their ballots, videotape voters as a form of intimidation. So that's his best chance to win. If there's a lot of that going on election day, then you might be concerned if you're a Biden voter. If there isn't, if things go pretty smoothly and people are saying they've been able to vote and there's the lines are, people are able to handle the lines, then that would be a good sign for Biden folks.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think also alongside of that is that two of the states that you mentioned are fast counting, right? Like Pennsylvania is not fast counting, but Florida is a pretty fast counting state, and so is Texas. And so if Joe Biden, even if he loses Florida by a little bit, it's probably, as you say, a sign of a good night for him. I would also say in Texas. So keep your eye on some of those fast counting states. And as you say, Georgia, if we go to bed on Tuesday night, as you say, and may not be called, but Joe Biden's ahead in Georgia, they're going to be really happy.
Totally.
So you mentioned voter suppression, and I want to turn to another part of what you cover, which is about sort of hate groups and militia groups in that realm of our society. And Donald Trump has been pretty explicit in urging them to show up at the polls. They have a website called Army for Trump, where you can enlist yourself to poll watch. He's signaled to Proud Boys and to others like Oath Keepers that they should be very vigilant in coming to the polls. Those are all armed groups. So I'm wondering, is this just rhetoric, or you think that this is something that we actually have to be concerned about? There are, a lot of people who are in some way marginalized in society, who may have issues at the polls. If these armed groups show up, like Black people or trans people or others, I'm just wondering, is this something that people actually have to be concerned about, or is it just kind of rhetoric as every year?
It is certainly rhetoric, and it is not dissimilar from the rhetoric he pulled in 2016. He also then called for people to show up at the polls and to watch them, and there's going to be sneaky stuff that people in urban areas are going to do, he alleged. In that case, we fortunately did not see many major incidents, and I would expect that would be the case now. I mean, the targets in these respects would be people in cities, people of color, therefore, in cities that are swing states. So like, Philadelphia, Atlanta. And in those cases, we have to hope that the local authorities are aware of, any people that might be coming by trying to intimidate, and that there's enough manpower on the streets that understand the need to protect the sanctity of the right to vote. It is certainly scary. The other element of this is not just on election day at the polls, but what happens immediately after. Are Trump's QAnon supporters going to, if Trump loses, accept the fact that he lost? They already don't think, they already are describing mail-in voting and early voting as a fraud and as a hoax. So if there are violent QAnon supporters, which there already have been isolated incidents of violence by people who purport to follow this wacky set of conspiracy theories, also extremely anti-trans set of conspiracy theories, they could take to the streets in the days and weeks after the election to protest Trump's loss. Or if there's a contested election that might its way through the courts in some way, that would also give an opportunity for the far right to take to the streets in a violent way. We have to hope that the people, the vulnerable people living in the cities that we're referring to here, have some degree of protection from local law enforcement. And we know historically that's certainly not the rule and often not the case. But that's what we have to hope for.
I just want to tell our audience, if you have any questions about the elections or comments, please send those in now. One of the things I wanted to ask you as we wrap up this segment, I have a feeling we'll be asking you to come back, is, so you mentioned that we could go to bed not knowing who won the race, and that we shouldn't necessarily be concerned about that. I am wondering when you think people should be concerned. So if we wake up on Wednesday and we don't know, it's fine. When would you advise viewers to say, okay, this is when we should be worried about where we are in this particular race or in this election?
When there start to be court challenges and injunctions that say things like stop counting the votes because there's an allegation of fraud. And when Trump lawyers are requesting that ballots stop, that the count stops, and then the judges agree with them, and then maybe it starts to go, further up the chain. We want, as Americans, I think every vote counted, and fair, whichever way it lands. And that's when I would start worrying about small d democracy in this country. And the further those legal challenges go and the longer they go, then they will end up being decided by fewer and fewer people and ultimately end up in the Supreme Court as one possibility, or in Congress. And we don't want that. We want the American people, the 300 plus million American people, to be making a decision about who the next president of the United States is. So I will start to get stressed out by this thing, more stressed out than I am already, once we see a lot of court challenges and injunctions to stop counting votes.
Well, let's hope we won't get there. Maybe all this is just we're being alarmist, and when we wake up on Tuesday morning, we'll have a clear result, but we shouldn't bet on it.
That's so possible.
Hopefully everyone, the whole point of this conversation was to forewarn everyone so they are prepared for the things that could come. I want to thank you so much for coming on and helping us talk through those things and issues, and good luck out there in the last 5 days of the campaign trail. And we hope that you'll come back. Thank you so much for coming on.
It would be my pleasure. Thanks so much, Amar. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. That is Matt Katz, who is, in a very intrepid, fearless manner, reporting on the 2020 campaign and presidential election. You're watching Lives at Stake.